Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony is one of those masterpieces, unparalleled in music history. I mean, there are, of course, many great symphonies, and there are, of course, sort of high points in composers' output. This is high point for Tchaikovsky. He was 52 or 53, I think, and he was beginning to despair. He was world famous by this time. I mean, he'd been world famous for quite a number of years. And he was always nervous about being so famous. It didn't actually always sit well with him. He was very nervous around people, and he had some health issues, and he was starting to feel like he couldn't compose anymore, like all of his best melodies were behind him. And he had written a fourth symphony, which had been very successful, although in Europe they had said, well, it isn't really the European model of a symphony, it's a little too rough. And then he had written a fifth symphony to try and put those criticisms to rest. Of adulthood, the movement of struggle, of perseverance, of fighting to find your own road, of working on projects. It's really almost a war at times. It is the most driven, most powerful, most uplifting movement, perhaps in the entire symphonic repertoire. Audiences routinely applaud wildly after the third movement, even though the symphony isn't over. It sounds like it must be over because it's such a powerfully uplifting ending of that. But that was not his idea. It was traditional to end a symphony in triumph, like that. But he was charting the course of life, and life ends in decay, in decline. And so he wanted to write the last movement of his symphony in a declining, melancholy adagio, one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. It ends with nothing more than the last breath and the last heartbeat of life in the timpani and the basses. Gorgeous music from beginning to end. He thought he had come up with his masterpiece, but audiences had never heard a slow ending, and they didn't like it. So it was not a hit. It was not an instant hit at the premiere in Russia, and he was very, very depressed about that. Whether or not because of that depression, we don't know, but 9 days later, he was dead. He had drunk a glass of unboiled water during a cholera outbreak. They had cholera was a killer, one of the worst diseases that strike humankind, all particularly through that period. And in Russia, they, like other places, they really were suffering with many different bouts of cholera that were coming. And this was sort of at the tail end of an outbreak. It almost seemed like things were getting back to normal, but still it was not. It was. You never drank unboiled water, but he did, and contracted cholera and died just a few days later. So he never lived to see that this piece was one of the pinnacles of the orchestral repertoire.